Is that recording now?
It just gave a little pre-recorded recording in progress thing, so I think we're
Okay,
good.
good. Okay, so yeah, if you guys read the brief, and as you know, John, this is about yourself. So you're a community development leader, an urban planner, and the co-founder of Built by Many in Detroit. You got your master's degree in urban planning at the University of Michigan,
Mhm.
and that was preceded by your public policy degree at Michigan State. And you kind of use that to work in transportation planning, different grassroots organizations, and some civic engagement roles. Um, and yeah, I guess we were hoping to learn more from your experience as an urban planner and a community organizer because you kind of understand leadership and collaboration, and how strategic design thinking operate across communities, different organizations, and the built environment especially.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, could you just share how the journey of how you got to where you are today, like what led you to these leadership roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think my journey, like a lot of folks, was like a long, kind of circuitous journey through a lot of different places. And I think for me, a lot of it was learning as much what I didn't want to do and what I didn't like as what I did want to do and what I did like, you know. And I've always been kind of an entrepreneurially spirited person. And so when I first went to college, not knowing really what I wanted to study, I chose business as my major. And uh, after about 3 semesters of that, and seeing what the outcomes of that were and the career paths and just the world and the classmates that was sort of preparing me for, I was honestly kind of horrified. And I think the truth is, I've always been sort of a justice oriented person. And so seeing how the world of business tends to function and the way that business schools tend to function, I was honestly kind of horrified. And I had a little bit of like what you might call a quarter life crisis or something. And I was, you know, I kind of came to this realization that I needed to, one, money isn't everything, and two, I needed to find work in a career that I was both passionate about and also that I felt like I was making a positive contribution to the world. And so through that lens, that brought me into public policy and wanting to kind of understand, the forces behind the system that made things function the way that they did. And I learned a ton through that. And I even dabbled with the possibility of working in politics a little bit. But I think that that world is not for the faint of heart. And it's also kind of removed from the, I don't want to say removed from the people, but it kind of is. We have
Yeah.
leaders now that are a lot better at really engaging with their constituencies on a meaningful way, but that honestly was really rare in those days.
Yeah.
And I think that honestly, for me, a lot of it started with I just really loved riding my bike. And I had a period of time after college where I was kind of adrift. It was the Great Recession and there were no jobs to be found. And after college, my friends all kind of scattered to the wind in a lot of different directions to a lot of different cool cities. And so over the course of like a year, I just went and visited a lot of people in a lot of places and brought my bike with me everywhere I went. And pedaled extensively around New York and Chicago and Portland and Seattle and San Francisco and Austin, Texas, and all these other and all these different cities. And I think in doing so, it gave me um, a really intimate kind of view of these places and really helped me understand what these places were, understand their built environments, but then also at the same time, the kind of social forces that play, getting to know people in these different communities. And I think ultimately that's what drew me to urban planning. And, I think as you might have mentioned, I started off wanting to be a transportation planner and I wanted to really just like make the world more bikeable. That was like my number one goal was just like we need to make places more bikeable. I was very concerned and still am very concerned about climate change. And so I really wanted to help spur more sustainable transportation for the world. And I just saw the bike as the solution to that. And in a lot of ways it still is. And so that's what brought me into urban planning. And then once I started studying that and getting to understand, you know, how transportation is just a very small chunk of a much bigger kind of system and world, and that, transportation is very important and it needs to be addressed. But at the same time, there's so many other needs, and I got a lot more acquainted with the city of Detroit and came to realize that there were just so many needs across so many avenues. And I think that honestly, at that point, I really was interested in Detroit. I finished grad school, and I honestly, with a master's degree in urban planning, I did a year of AmeriCorps because one, the economy was in really rough shape, and two, I just really, more than anything, wanted to kind of get connected to the Detroit community and really understand the community. And I think that one of the things that I came to understand in my travels was that the real experts in all places are the people that live there, the people who have been there for generations, the people who have roots in these places. And the worst thing that you can be is um, what's the word? Someone who thinks themselves an expert and thinks that they know what is best for other people. And so I really just wanted to engage on a deep level. And I'm really glad that I did because it really tapped me. And I was a community organizer, literally going door to door, trying to organize neighborhood block clubs in neighborhoods that where the social fabric had been strained over the years for a variety of reasons. And I think in doing that, it um, really helped me understand Detroit on a really deep level. And then from there, I honestly just followed every opportunity that interested me. And it was kind of a random path. And sometimes there were false starts, and sometimes it involved working jobs that I ended up hating and deciding I needed to leave. I learned something from each and every one of those uh, jobs and every single one of those roles and every single one of those volunteer opportunities and boards that I joined and all these different things. And I think each little experience kind of contributed to who and what I am. And so I guess that's the sort of what brought me into community development in general. As far as founding Built by Many, I worked in the nonprofit community for a long time as a just full-time salaried employee. And again, I think that I've always been someone with a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit who kind of likes to do things my own way, to be honest. And I found that sometimes being part of even sometimes small organizations, they would have pretty rigid structures that didn't necessarily suit me or foster um, they weren't the kind of environment that fostered uh, my own development in a way that I was seeking. And so I made a decision that came with a lot of consideration and was not made rashly, but I decided to kind of go at it on my own. And so I started my own consulting practice that was called JB Associates Consulting. And it was just me. And I would occasionally tag in other people that I knew to work on projects. And with that, I sort of found some freedom to operate how I wanted, but then also it's lonely, being solo out there by yourself. It's a lonely place to be. And I kind of missed working with other people.
Right.
Um, I've also always been someone who's been very interested in alternative structures of um, alternative organizational structures, I guess is the best way of putting it. Um, and I've always been very, very intrigued by the idea of democratic workplaces and worker owned businesses like cooperatives. And so, uh, basically, through some existing relationships that I had, as well as a relationship that I forged probably about 5 years ago, I met some kindred spirits who similarly were doing work in a similar kind of space and had similar ideals and a desire to do things a little bit differently. And that's really how Built by Many was born. It was me and my colleague, Jessica Bandolapati, who is an old friend of mine, one of the very first people who I met in Detroit, who was also doing AmeriCorps for her first year in Detroit. And then our other partner, Andy Kopitz, who was a board member of an organization that I did some work for. And basically, with him as a volunteer board member, was doing some work on some projects with me. And we also hit it off and came to realize we had this sort of shared vision and purpose and goal.
I mean, yeah, that's great. It sounds like from what I'm gathering is that your pursuit into being a leader, it didn't start by just thinking in your head like, oh, I'm going to be a leader. It started by, having a passion and seeing a problem and just pursuing that and learning from every little experience. And that's kind of exactly what we've been learning in our class. So I think that's super valuable to know that it's not just about being born as a leader. It's about learning from your opportunities and just pursuing your interests where you see a problem needs a solution. And that's what leads to you being a leader, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I think also there was a some people, I don't think that leadership is an innate trait that people are born with. I think that some people, depending on how they're raised with the parents or family or friends that they have, they might learn
Hmm.
leadership skills when they're young. I didn't really, to be honest. And when when I first gained leadership roles, honestly, I was kind of uncomfortable in those roles, and I had to learn a lot.
Right.
A lot of it is learning how to listen more than you talk and learning how to give constructive feedback. I remember early on, so this is a random aside, but when I was at MSU, as like a part-time job, I was one of those obnoxious students that maybe you've encountered one way or another who call up alumni on the phone and ask them for donations back to the university that they probably still have student loan debt for. And so I did that, and I was actually pretty good at it because I've always been a little bit, again, not actually a natural sales person, but that's a skill that I sort of learned over the years through jobs that I had before. And I was good enough at it that they eventually promoted me, where I was in charge of a team of callers, and then later that I was in charge of basically like all the callers. And so I remember early on in my leadership path, I was like asked to give like a constructive critique to a colleague, and I basically was just like, it was bad. Here's what was bad. And they did not receive that feedback well, and rightly so, because that is not a constructive way to provide feedback. And I really kind of stepped in it and then had to learn how to acknowledge that I made a mistake and to um, kind of own that and take accountability, which is another huge thing in leadership, is to acknowledge when you are wrong, even when it's with a subordinate, even when it's, these people who are convinced that, admitting wrongdoing is a sign of weakness or something. It's such foolishness. If you want anyone to respect you, you have to own your decisions. You have to own your behaviors, positive and negative. And so through that was my first step of learning about how to provide constructive criticism, was by doing it the absolute worst way and really stepping in it and facing the consequences of that, and then learning how to do it better.
Totally. I mean, that answered a good amount of our questions there too. We were wondering what it's like to be a leader and how to communicate to your team in those like vulnerable moments of either you being wrong or someone needing feedback and offering something that's maybe, you know, not the nicest thing to hear. So that was definitely a lot of questions that we had on leadership that I think takes a lot of trial and error, I'd say, and especially across different types of personalities and groups.
Yeah, and I think the number one piece of advice I can give on that, and all the best leaders that I have ever known, are the ones who can admit when they were wrong and just be open about that. And those who are able to provide constructive, positive feedback. I'm a big believer, you've probably heard of this sort of phrase or idea, but like the compliment sandwich,
Yeah.
you can give feedback. You need to give feedback, honestly, because if you don't, then you're kind of doing everyone a disservice, right?
Right.
If someone that you are leading is not holding up their end of the bargain or is not doing a good enough job, then that ultimately is going to impact almost going to have tremendous impacts across the board, right? And so,
Yeah.
it is really important to provide that feedback, but you have to do it in a way that's accessible to people. And it's funny because I keep hearing like people saying about not to lump your whole generation into a group, but I feel like people keep saying that Gen Z. Do you identify as Gen Z, by the way? I don't even
I
know.
do. Do
Okay, yeah.
y'all?
So I feel like there's this idea out there that Gen Z is like too sensitive or something, which I think is absolute nonsense and garbage. But I also think at the same time, in a lot of ways, your generation has like learned to stand up for itself in a way where just like taking verbal abuse
Right.
is not something that flies. And like I am someone who has been on the receiving end of bad leadership where I've just been the recipient of
Mhm.
just, you know, fair or not criticism. And the truth is, nobody likes to receive criticism like that. And even like thick skinned boomers, honestly, they're just lying. They
Yeah.
don't. kind of feedback either. They pretend that they do, but then they act out in other ways and they get, it. Uh, I'm off track here, but the bottom line is that, you know, people in general, if you are able to highlight the things that they are doing well, celebrate those things, and then say, but also I noticed that, or also just want to bring your attention to, and the areas that, need work, whatever they might be, and then circle back around with another compliment, reminding them they're a valued, that you value them and their contribution.
Hmm.
So not everyone can receive feedback super well, but 9 out of 10 times when I have stuck to that basic mold, the results are positive.
Yeah, and I think another part of that is probably like outside of just that one conversation, probably as a leader, you create an environment where employees feel comfortable to share and like sit in that discourse. So are there any like practices that you like implement like in day to day within your team to like kind of make those conversations a little bit easier?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things. Um, I mean, and I think so much of it is the overall environment, which is a lot of little practices to your question and point. Um, I think, again, a lot of it as sort of a leader starts with just making it clear from day one and over and over again to be very solicitous and not just, you can say my door is always open, metaphorically or not, but at the same time, just saying those things can be kind of hollow if you don't actually create an environment that sort of um, welcomes that, and
Right.
so I try to be very solicitous. You know, uh, I will try regularly to check in and, so for instance, there's someone that I work very closely with on one client. And it's actually kind of a unique relationship because this particular person is actually, it's complicated, and this is where you get into like all the weird ways that businesses and organizations are organized. But I, as an independent contractor, sort of on behalf of Built by Many, am the executive director of a small organization. And so in that role, I supervise someone who is an employee of that organization. And
Right.
so, like, she is my subordinate. She reports to me, but then also like her work goes beyond the work she does with me into other areas. And so she has other bosses too. And some of them are the people that I answer to and that pay my check. I know it's complicated and weird, but I have weekly check-ins with her. And pretty much every week I say, how's your workload? How are you managing? How are you balancing? How are all the things that you have on your plate right now? And what are the things that are causing strain and what are the things that are feeling pretty good, and how can I help
Mm.
you more successful in the things that you're doing. Another thing that I'll often do is I will check in with people on their roles, because the fact is, in this world, kind of no matter how you slice it, I think almost no matter what profession you're in, though I'm sure some are a little bit more narrowly kind of focused than others, when you take on a job, you will end up finding yourself drifting in a lot of different ways and areas. And that is a little bit normal, especially in smaller organizations. That's just going to happen. Um, but at the same time, I found, even with myself, and perhaps you found this with yourself too, there are some tasks that I like doing, or at least don't mind doing. And there are others that I really don't like doing. And those are the things that, even if I put them on my to-do list at the very top, a week later, they've just drifted to the bottom of that to-do list and they're still undone. And admittedly, some things just have to get done. But one
Mhm.
of the things that I've also learned in managing a lot of people is that different people have different tolerance for different tasks. And
Mm.
so one of the best things you can do as a leader is just be checking in with your people on the nature of the tasks they're doing, the things that they're doing. Because sometimes it's as simple as acknowledging that like person A is really good at and enjoys doing X, Y, and Z, but really struggles with and hates doing item Q. And then someone else, person B, has no problem doing item Q. If you just ask them and check in with them, that thing will get done yesterday. And so part
Right.
of it really is just kind of understanding who you're working with and what their um, what things come naturally for them and what things they like and don't like doing. And again, that doesn't always mean that people can get exactly what they want, but at
Mhm.
the same time, from the perspective of a leader who's trying to just produce the best outcomes as efficiently as possible, I have found that really the best way to do that is just to be checking in with people and to really be kind of honestly constantly making little micro adjustments based on that information.
Yeah,
And it's not always easy. But again, I think one of the things about leadership is that you're generally not like the lead worker, but you are the leader. You need to actually be aware of the people that are really doing the bulk of the work
right,
and making sure that you are engaged with them and in touch with them.
right, right. And properly delegating tasks sounds like a big part of that. I've definitely been in a position where Um, for example, like the sorority I was in, they felt that people needed to be put in positions or hold positions that they were uncomfortable with because they felt that it would make you grow. But I definitely experienced how that was poor leadership, at least for me, because I was put in a position that I'm not naturally good at and something that I really don't know a lot about. And lo and
Mhm.
behold, it didn't go well. So I definitely I'm hearing that as a leader, it's important to listen to yes, what people want to do, not that they can always get that, but also what they're good at, and they need to enjoy it enough that they'll pursue it and, give a good outcome for sure.
I think so. And you
Um,
also just reminded me of another practice that Built by Many
yeah.
does. So basically, it's structurally Built by Many. We have three, we call ourselves worker owners. And then beneath us, we have three, what we call members, which are folks that have been with us for a while. They're kind of like our most senior people. Um, they are not owners, but they are on the pathway to ownership. One of the things about our cooperative and the idea of democratic workplaces is that there's a clear path upwards,
Mhm.
and anyone, provided they basically um, do what is asked of them and expected of them in line with the bylaws and the things that we've created as an organization, they too can eventually become a co-owner and then share in the profits of our
Right.
business. Um, and so we have that. And then below that, depending on the projects, we will often kind of bring people in initially just as independent contractors on individual projects and see how it goes. And then from there, if you work on a few projects with us and it goes well, then we invite you to become a member, and then it kind of goes from there. And so when we do our regular check-ins, one of the things that I really like to do, both with our contractors and our members, because we as an organization, we're a multidisciplinary consulting business, and we wear a lot of hats, and we work with a lot of different clients on a lot of different kinds of projects. And so one of the things I'm often asking people is, okay, well, we hired you to be a graphic designer, or we hired you to be in a whatever, but now that you've like worked on some projects with us, you've gotten an idea of the kind of work that we do and the kind of people that are here. Are there any things that you see that we do that you're interested in, that you'd be interested in learning more about? Doesn't matter if you have a degree in it, doesn't matter if you have experience in it before. If we're doing something you're interested in,
Mhm.
let us know and we will try to kind of give you an opportunity to learn more and experience more about that.
Yeah, yeah. And it sounds like also what you're saying, like being a good leader is really helping your team have opportunities to grow and really listening to where those opportunities are. And
Mm-hmm.
you had mentioned something else that I was also curious about as a leader. So you talked about the shifting dynamics between someone who had to report to you, but also they had another boss who was also your boss. And even now, like dealing with the situation you just described, dealing with different kinds of people in different levels. What do you do as a leader when there are multiple leaders in charge or different leaders who report to different people? Like, has there been a moment where there's discourse in those situations and where do you like step in? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my thing also, I think that you have to advocate for your people. I think that
Right.
is one of the most important things about being a leader too, is to not just internally do all the things that I was already saying, but then similarly, so for instance, in the case of this organization, basically like there is a executive director of this organization who is in charge of everybody, right?
Hmm.
And so part of it is not being afraid, but again, communication matters and communication styles matter. And just storming into someone's office and saying, I have a problem with the way that you're treating this person generally
Right.
will not produce a positive outcome for you. But not being afraid to engage with those people. And so, for example, in this kind of instance, there have been times where I will go into that executive director and I will say, hey, listen, um, here are some things that I am working on with this employee. And some of these things are very time sensitive and very important for the following reasons. And, for instance, there was a time where we had some time sensitive items, but then this person kept getting pulled into random last minute stuff by the executive director who was just looking at their own stuff. And, the truth is, generally speaking, if you are kind of an employee, the higher someone ranks, the more likely it is that you're just going to jump into action when they ask you, right? So if the head of the organization is like, we need to do this now, come on, you're probably not going to say no. You don't feel empowered to do that. And so, you know, going in and just having a very, I don't want a very compassionate conversation, I think, saying, hey, listen, I understand that you have these priorities, but I try really hard. So one thing also is I'm a big believer, and this is not something that comes naturally to me, but like you got to schedule things out. You got to have a plan. You have to. It doesn't mean that you can't deviate from your plan ever, but that means work plans. That means project plans. That means all the different kinds of plans. And I try really hard to put those plans in place so that I know that we need to have our annual report complete and ready to mail out by X date so that I know that we need to have, you
Right.
know, revisions done by this date, which means have our content done by this date and et cetera, et cetera. And then in doing so, going in and saying, hey, listen, like I have a work plan with this person that we have worked out. I want to make sure that you are aware of it for one. And two, it I have noticed that this person has been pulled into things kind of last minute. And I understand that you have your own priorities and there's priorities within the organization, but also I need you to understand that I too am trying to complete things on my end in accordance with these goals as well. We have a work plan in place. And so I need you to be aware of that when you are asking things of this
Right.
person. And it's not like just doing that is like a magic spell that fixes everything. It's more of like an ongoing conversation that is always happening, and that's just the realities of the world, right? It's very easy to
Right.
get tunnel vision. It's very easy to get caught up in your own stuff. But I think again, so much of it is having these conversations where, again, I think compassion is a really important thing because understanding that everyone gets tunnel vision, everyone gets caught up in their own stuff. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean that they're trying to make things harder for anyone else.
Right.
It just means that they are running their own race and they get caught up in it. And the only way to pull them out of that is to remind them that there are other things going on. And again, sometimes it can be tempting, especially if someone's really frustrating you, to kind of come in guns a blazing and saying, you're really pissing me off for this reason. But honestly, I think that accessing a place of compassion and realizing, okay, this person, for instance, with this executive director, this person is running a medium-sized organization with a lot of employees and a lot of projects. And the particular department that I am basically running is just one tenth or one fifth or whatever of all the things under this person's purview. And so it's very easy for them to, you know, uh, get hyper focused on other things and not realizing um the spillover effects of their actions. And just by having that in mind when I go and converse with people, I think really helps. And there's no controlling for, again, leaders vary a lot, and some people are very suited to leadership and are very capable of accessing those places of compassion themselves. Other people, not so much.
Hmm.
And it's hard to, it's a tough reality, but sometimes part of it also is knowing when you are in an environment that just isn't going to be fostering of you and what you need. And sometimes you just have to acknowledge that and make an exit strategy. In previous
Hmm.
generations, there was this idea that was very pervasive where it was like you get your one job with your one company and you work there for 35 years or whatever, and then you retire and you get a pension and yada yada. But like the fact is, one, pensions basically don't exist anymore. And unfortunately, employers, even in the nonprofit world, there are some amazing nonprofits that I have known. There's one, I'm not going to name names, but if you look in the news, you can find them. And they were a well-established, solid organization. And a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, they had all their employees come in for a meeting and they told them, hey, effective immediately, none of you have jobs anymore. Our organization doesn't exist anymore. Sorry. And that is just the harsh reality of the world, is that that kind of loyalty just like does not exist anymore. And so, you as an employee, and I think that really, leader is a funny term because you don't necessarily have to be in a managerial position to be a leader.
Right.
um, and I think that the truth is one of the keys to kind of, I mean, this goes beyond just being a leader. This is just kind of how to exist and operate, is acknowledge when the leadership that you are working with is not going to be conducive. And again, part of that comes with that gut check of, doing kind of an internal audit of your own psyche and saying, okay, why am I feeling this way? Am I feeling this way because this person and I have different personalities and there's some friction there, but this person is really doing their best and they're a good person, and I just, I need to figure out a way to work in relation to them? Or is it that this person is just not, just knowing that it's not going to work? I had a boss who was the head of an organization, and it was a similar situation where I was kind of a middle manager in this organization. And I was torn because I had people that were working for me that I really valued and really appreciated and kind of almost wanted to insulate. But I found that the executive director of that organization was just not, no matter what I did, and I tried really earnestly in a lot of different ways to kind of, bridge that gap in communication. But ultimately, it just became clear to me that that was just not going to be a viable path forward, and that I was just going to be spinning my wheels. And that is when I decided to leave that organization. And that's not an easy decision to come by. But at the same time, it's important to acknowledge that nothing is permanent. And even if you're in a pretty significant leadership position, sometimes you need to leave. Sometimes you need to look elsewhere.
Yeah.
I think
And
that that is a big reason why I really advocate for the democratic workplace. It's not perfect and it comes with its own challenges, because then you have to, you know, in a way, it's a relinquishing of some control. But I think that's what I really like about it too, is that as long as from the get-go that you and these other folks that you're working with have a shared vision and mission that you're working toward, and a structure or set of structures in place for how you are going to um mediate conflict and how you are going to address interpersonal issues, it's a lot easier to keep that organization healthy. I think that in general, I'm a big advocate for flat organizations rather than like
yeah.
tall hierarchical organizations. And I'm sure as the three of you kind of make your way into the professional world, you will start to see that even in the more traditional workplaces, which I think a lot of architectural firms are, though I have become more and more aware of more cooperatively and democratically operating design studios,
Mhm.
uh, that there's a wide array. And I think in general, the world is kind of taking those lessons too. And I think we are starting to see flatter organizational structures, because again, I think that that is um, that's much more conducive to a healthy work environment. Uh, but I would also caution you, I think that, and everybody's different, right? So in terms of each of you as individuals, you'll have different tolerances for different types of people and different personalities and different types of work structures. But when you are, you know, continuing on your professional path and maybe looking at your first like real, I hate using that word because every job is a real job, but your first like professional architecture job, take a good look at that, the actual organizational structure,
Mhm.
because at least in my case, what I learned is very hierarchical structures are not very conducive to my personal development
Mhm.
and well-being. And I think that one of the things too about flatter structures that I have learned, and I think every organization is different. I said before that as a leader, you're leading the work, but the truth is also you are kind of in it too. And I think that the flatter the work environment and structure is, the closer you are to the work itself. And
Mm,
sometimes that means literally being there doing the work alongside the people that you lead. And sometimes it's more of a metaphorical kind of thing where it's just, you're less removed from what is actually happening on the day to day. And it
yeah,
allows you to be more compassionate, more empathetic, and more capable to actually lead because you're able to be more responsive and more aware of what is actually happening.
right, right. Sorry, I had something to say and then I just completely lost it. But I guess the follow-up question I had after I'm so mad I lost that question. It was a good one. But in that
Exactly.
hierarchy of working alongside different kinds of people, oh well, sorry, it just reoccurred to me that you were explaining how being a leader isn't always about your position title, and that really rang true to me because it is true. Like there could be someone who's in a lower position, but you really look to because they have that leadership quality. Maybe they have that confidence. There's someone you can look to for answers, or someone who just communicates well. And those align with what you've kind of been describing, what a good leader is. And so that flat hierarchy sounds really conducive to like empowering other leaders to step forward because it's not just about your title and it's a lot about how you conduct yourself, and how you interact with the people around you. And so on the note of the people around you, I was wondering, within um, the different kinds of fields that you have to work with and how they intersect, has
Mhm.
there, what do you wish that designers specifically understood about the sectors that you work in with planning, community engagement, cooperative development, and transportation? I know you mentioned a few things like really listen to the community and make sure that you're not um, acting like you know what's better for them, that they are the experts. But yeah, so what mistakes do young professionals most often make when we're attempting to be a designer in these areas?
Yeah, I think that it really does kind of come down to, how do you put it? I feel like it is tempting to think that you know more than other people. And I think that it is tempting to think that other people have it wrong. And I think that you will encounter people that maybe actually are kind of wrong.
Hmm.
And I think that there is a right way and a wrong way to kind of steer discourse and a collaborative design process, um, that involves, I'm saying a lot of words, but I don't think I'm actually saying anything useful. Patience, 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 patience. There will be times where you go into a room and you do know more than other people, and people will be saying, you know, um, people be pushing back against some sometimes really core kind of principles that you hold dear. And it's
Hmm.
not because they're idiots, it's because they are sometimes uninformed. And just because someone is uninformed, again, does not make them an idiot. And it does
Hmm.
not mean they cannot be successfully informed. And I think in the same way that when you provide constructive feedback to, um, someone that is working for you, when you are leading someone directly and you need to provide feedback to them, it needs to be constructive, not destructive. I think the same is absolutely true when you are engaging in sort of a collaborative design process, which all design is, right?
Hmm. Yep.
All design is collaborative, all design is serving someone, some end
Hmm.
user, some something. And in order to produce a successful product, I think part of it is identifying where the gaps of knowledge are and patiently and compassionately helping others understand when they might not. And again, there will be times where some people will be extremely stubborn, and no matter how hard you try, they are not going to be receptive to, your explanations, even if they're coming from a good place. But I would say the overwhelming majority of the time, with some patience and a willingness to kind of go deep with people, you can help people understand, then you can design collaboratively, right? You might come into a situation knowing, I'm trying to think of like a, um this is not at all, this is more of a streetscape design kind of thing, but nonetheless, I think, at least in my personal professional
Mhm.
world, it kind of rings true, and maybe on some level it will for you too. Um, Basically, I there was a project I worked on where MDOT, the Michigan Department of Transportation, was proposing a major redesign of a major street, right? And this is like an old timey street that literally is just like a million lanes of traffic in both direction, and it's kind of like a pedestrian and cyclist death trap, basically. And so MDOT was like very earnestly wanting to um, improve the streetscape and make it more accessible to all road users, which I, as someone who professionally specializes in these things, understands the value. And I've already said how much of a cyclist I am, but also, again, pedestrian safety
Mhm.
um, and transit, making things, designing for all road
Human-centric
users are very
design.
important, and it has a
Yeah.
lot of tremendous benefits across the board, right? And so there were some very earnest people from the community that were very upset because there were going to be fewer parking spaces. And it's very easy to come into a situation like that and be like, you idiot, we're going to make it so that it's safer for everyone and more people are going to walk and bike. And yeah, there'll be fewer parking spaces, but it's not going to matter because it will make it easier for people to use other modes of transportation. Slash, also, why should cars reign supreme? And
Right.
just, really just, it's very tempting just to kind of just dunk on those people and just be like,
Right.
please shut up. You are wrong. Here is why. But instead, what I opted to do was I came at it from a place of compassion with a lot of folks. And I said, listen, I understand your concerns. And I realized
Mhm.
that, let's say talking to business owners, which I was talking to many, they were concerned about how that would impact their business. And I said, I understand that concern. And I want to make sure that this doesn't negatively impact your business, but I also want you to consider some things like, did you know that cyclists take up way less space, and offering up a little bit of room for them will make it easier for them to get to you. More people will bike to your business. It'll require
Mhm.
less parking in general. Same goes for pedestrians. Same goes for traffic, for transit.
Mhm.
And not being too big of a know-it-all, but having some numbers handy because facts matter.
Mhm.
Still, I believe, even though in some subsets of our society that may not be the case. And broadly speaking, what I have found is really, really helpful and useful is, um, as I just said, data and facts matter, but
Mhm.
sometimes it can be kind of um, a little bit too abstract for a lot of folks, especially when you're talking about people that are, I hate the term layman, but people who may not be as knowledgeable in a particular area as you. Um, but stories are extremely powerful.
Mhm.
And stories can easily be discarded by people as something that is just one person's single experience that doesn't necessarily speak to the broader world. And so I think to successfully make a case to people, you kind of have to weave the two together. You have to have good, compelling stories that you can back up with data. And so, to zoom a little bit further out, when you are trying to engage with people and with community, one, the first thing you want to just do is listen, hear what they have to say, hear what their concerns are. If you come out with your own agenda and your own ideas, that isn't to say that you can't do any design work whatsoever without getting feedback from people, because the simple fact is it's a lot easier to get a process going if you at least have some ideas. But I think it's important to come at people and say, here's some things that we're thinking. What do you think about this? And then just listen and hear what they have to say. Try to acknowledge, the place that they are coming from. And then in the places where you are noticing some friction and some, you know, uh, the kind of challenges I was speaking about a moment ago, where you might not be in alignment with somebody and they might not be thrilled with what it is you're proposing or what your design is, to be able to eloquently explain where you're coming from with a compelling story that you can back up with data, but then also having that willingness and that ability to acknowledge where someone else is coming from, and
Mhm.
have that little bit of flexibility in your brain to acknowledge that, like, maybe I don't know everything either. And maybe that these data points that are coming from this other person are valid in their own ways. And I think that it can be I think the big challenge in general with that, and it always is and it always will be, is filtering, right? And I don't the best advice that I can give to that is just keep doing it and you'll learn as you go. I don't know any shortcuts. And I think that that is one of those things that I would kind of classify under the category of wisdom that you just have to gain over time. And again, the more open minded and open hearted you are as you go into these processes, the more quickly you will gain wisdom and you'll make some missteps. We all do. I've made plenty of them. But I think that, again, going back to having that ability to acknowledge when you were wrong and to be to to show some grace while that is happening generally can allow these processes to move forward positively. In the case of this major streetscape redesign project that I was a part of, at the end of the day, it was one of those things where there was kind of this, it was a giant mess because on the one side, you had these people who didn't want to see anything change at all. They wanted the status quo. They wanted cars and nothing but cars. And on the other side, you had this bunch of people that I really agreed with that wanted, they wanted more stuff for bikes and pedestrians, and they wanted a dedicated transit lane only for buses, no cars allowed. And those two things were not fully in direct conflict, but there were points of conflict. And so I think that, what I was able to successfully do, kind of utilizing my accumulated wisdom and also just kind of practicing the very techniques I was just sort of describing, is I was able to really drill down to what mattered most to people and finding those places of intersection and steering the final design product to something that honestly was nobody's first choice.
Hmm.
Nobody loved it, but everyone could live with it. And it is a little bit disappointing to folks sometimes to think in those terms because sometimes that means compromising on your design ideals. It just does. But if the end goal is all of the users of that are are satisfied and okay with it, compromise has become a dirty word in our society, but honestly, I think compromise is essential and acknowledge. And I think that, again, one of those things that like file under wisdom, but one of those things you just have to kind of develop over time is figuring out what elements of compromise are what compromises will help steer toward a more positive outcome and what compromises are going to actually seriously undermine the actual quality of the thing that you are doing.
Right.
And so in the case of this streetscape redesign, we got the bike lanes, we got a lot of pedestrian crossings, we got a lot of things. We didn't get a dedicated transit lane. I was disappointed to see that, but at the same time, the door is still open in the future for a dedicated transit lane. All it means is taking one of the lanes that's currently dedicated for cars and in the future converting it over. Is it the ideal outcome? No. But at the same time, it is way better than what might have been. And at the end of the day, if you were to survey people about what they think of that outcome, people are pretty satisfied, like
Right.
just in the case of that one, there was a public meeting held when the first version of the design was released, which I really liked. And that meeting, I won't say that it almost got violent, but it was one of the most charged meetings I have ever been in. And by meeting three, once the designs have been revised with all the feedback and all of the compromise in mind, nobody was yelling, nobody was screaming, nobody was furious, nobody stormed out of that meeting, and we were able to move forward.
Right. And so what I've gathered, I know we lost Thomas. I know they both have class at 2. So
Oh, no
um
worries. I should probably I need to wrap by two as well,
you're
but
good. I'll give a quick so I guess like the what I've heard from everything that you've explained and even in this last situation, the core tenets, I guess, of being a leader and not just in the sense of wanting to lead, but in conducting yourself in a way that people will look to you for answers is you need to be patient and be calm. You have to have compassion and listen to people. You have to be humble and take accountability, um, and just be open-minded and open-hearted. And those were kind of the main things I got from um, everything that you've explained today. And I guess the question I was gonna leave you with to answer is maybe to talk about the challenges or opportunities you think that designers are gonna face in the field that previous generations didn't, and what advice would you leave us with going forward to kind of navigate those challenges based on your experience and how you've had to pivot multiple times?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the biggest one, honestly, is the constantly evolving technology that we have, and the fact that like there used to be you went to an architecture studio and there were desks upon desks of drafts people
Yeah,
who were literally just like by hand drawing out things, and now that is, a lot of that was um digitized and can be done way more efficiently by far fewer people. And now I don't even know if we've fully seen what AI is going to do
right.
to build as well. And so I think that the honest truth is the the most important thing looking into the future, I think, is understanding these emerging technologies. I think that being reluctant and a little bit wary of them is a healthy way to be, but at the same time, acknowledging that like you're going to have to constantly reinvent yourself.
Hmm.
And you're going to have to stay on top of the technology. And that does not mean that you have to be at the forefront of all technology or that you have to be, um, you know, pushing that technology forward. But people that are completely and utterly resistant to change usually just get swept over by it.
Right.
And I think that, finding that balance and really understanding and being aware of what is happening and coming along and being willing to reinvent yourself is really the key in this day and age. I think in design more than a lot of fields because
Hmm.
of what AI can do. And that's both a threat and a positive thing at the same time, right? Because on
Right.
the one hand, there are going to be fewer jobs in the field,
Absolutely.
in the design field in general. Like that's just the harsh reality of it. But at the same time, learning how to harness these technologies, um, I think is really important. And I think also um, being willing to advocate for what is right and making sure again that like making sure that you are finding yourself in an environment that your values aligned with
Hmm.
be ever important.
So good. Thank you. I guess we lost everyone, so it's just me and you again. But
Okay.
yeah, I'm sorry they didn't stay till the end to say
That's all good.
goodbye because we really do appreciate your time and I wish they would have stayed to say that. Um, but yeah, I feel like I just got so much valuable insight. Like there's been a lot in this class that we learn about and our professor talks to us, but hearing a lot of your insight specifically as someone who's had to do a lot of community organizing, which I feel like is really intertwined with design, it is. We talked about how it is just it's so valuable. It's so valuable and I really appreciate it.
And I think that like I think we talked about this before. I think that it is really tempting. People that have strong technical skills will sometimes discard the human element of things and just lean on their tremendous technical skills. I think that that is almost always to their detriment. The people that can
Mhm.
understand the people side of things will always, always, always have greater success.
Totally. Okay. Well, I'll let you get going. Thank you so much again. I'll have this recording if I don't know if you wanted it. I'm gonna have to submit it to my professor, so that'll be fun.
Cool. I think I'm probably good on
Okay. Well, I
doing
will
that. Well, watching video myself is not like my my favorite thing in the world. But happy to help out. Best of luck with the rest of your semester. And yeah,
we'll talk after.
let's check in after the holidays. Like I said, I think that this site plan type thing I think has some legs. So I probably won't really start rolling stuff out until the new year anyway.
Okay.
Um, but would love to explore that with you a little bit.
Okay, good. I'm gonna be in contact with some more people in the field. One of my professors is helping me, so hopefully I'll get more knowledge by that point too to kind of help you more as well. So we
Awesome.
can both kind of work up and then meet up at the start line or whatever.
Perfect. That sounds great.
Okay, I'll see you then.
All
Thank
right, cool.
you.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.